Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the complimentary webinar from ICMI, The Customer is in Control, Marketing and the Contact Center, Talk Multi-Channel Support, sponsored by InContact. I'm Sarah Steely-Reed, Content Director for ICMI, and I'm your host for today. Before we begin, let's do some housekeeping. First, I'll ask that you take a moment to disable your pop-up blockers if they're on. You will notice that there are several icons at the bottom of the console window. The first allows you to see the presentation slides, so make sure this one is maximized. Next is the Q&A icon. We will be hosting a live Q&A throughout this webinar, and you can participate by asking questions at any time throughout the presentation. All you have to do is type your question into that window and click Submit. Now, if you're experiencing any technical problems during the presentation, you can click the question mark icon on the console to access the event help guide. We will also be conducting some polls during this session, and we really encourage you to participate. This webinar is meant to be interactive for everyone. Clicking the other icons on the console will allow you to access our presenters' bios, learn more about our sponsor InContact, or find out about other upcoming ICMI webinars. You can also download a copy of today's presentation in PDF format. We encourage you to be social throughout this webinar. You can access your Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn accounts directly from the webinar console. All you have to do is log in and you can share your insights. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our esteemed panel of presenters. Please welcome Marian McDonough, the Chief Marketing Officer for InContact, and Dr. Natalie Padoff, a social media analyst and business strategist. We have marketing and the contact center well represented today, and this should be a powerhouse of an hour. And again, I encourage you to share what you learn here today by using our handles and hashtags. We'll remind you a couple more times throughout the presentation, so please don't be shy. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Marian.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really great to be here with ICMI again, and a privilege to be presenting with the esteemed Dr. Natalie. You know, it's really interesting because we certainly are living in an inflection point in a time of significant change. For those of us who have spent any amount of time in the contact center, I think it's probably one of the most interesting times that we've ever experienced, because customer behavior and their expectations are changing dramatically. And you know, as we see in our little graphic there, all of the different things that are really coming into play that are impacting this. What we did want to do, though, Sarah, and I'm going to just turn it back to you for a moment, is we wanted to start off with a poll about which channels of service you're currently providing to your customers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marian. And so please go ahead and click on the channels that you are currently providing to your customers. So we have voice, email, chat, web, social, and mobile. So go ahead and select all of the ones that you're currently providing to your customers in your contact center. We just want to get a little feel for all the different channels that our audience is currently supporting.
And Sarah, I'm very interested to see what people say, because our experience is that still the predominance today is voice and voice plus one. You know, we typically see most of the contact centers that we work with here in North America that are maybe voice and email and maybe voice, email, and chat. So I'm interested to see, you know, what the audience has to say here.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting in some of the research that we've also been currently doing, in that chat is finally starting to see a pickup along with social and mobile. And I think social in particular is helping to inspire some of the contact centers to implement chat as well. All right, so let's take a look and see what the audience is saying. As we suspected, 100% of people are presently supporting voice, a large preponderance of email, pretty good size also doing web and chat, And it's really exciting to see that almost half of the audience is supporting social.
Yeah, and the question will be, and we'll get to this later when we talk a little bit more about social, and Dr. Natalie comes in with her 7 tips, but we also have a poll then, because the question that I have is, what does that really mean? What does it mean in your environment? Well, excellent. It's great to see that there really is at least a smattering of multi-channel going on out there. We're going to spend some time in the front end of this talking a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing, that I'm out there talking to folks about on an everyday basis, and then I'll share with you the results of an interesting poll that we did around customer behavior and multi-channel. But first, let's sort of go back to basics for just one moment, okay? And we went in the wrong direction as opposed to the right direction. There we go. What's really interesting about this graphic from my friends at Gartner is it represents, I think in a really clear and simple way, how the center of gravity has shifted in terms of business priorities over time. So we see that in the first half of the 20th century, it was really all about manufacturing, building capabilities, the infrastructure to bring great products to market. And then in the 60s through the 90s, as those markets expanded and globalized, it was all about getting products there in the most efficient way. But with the dawn of the information age, companies began to grapple with how to collect and leverage data and information. And now here we are in the very early days of the customer, where a company's success is tied to its both ability and willingness, and those are really important terms, to put the customer at the very heart of their decision-making and the associated processes. Because customers have more voice and more choice than ever before, and this power is the driving force in today's customer-focused economy. Now, I will argue that there are 2 significant sea changes that have occurred in this customer-driven landscape, and these are social and mobile. So now we're going to look a little bit at how these major trends are very specifically affecting the contact center. Let's first take a look at social media, and Dr. Natalie is going to talk a lot more about how to make social real in your environment in just a little bit. But I think there's some really interesting data on this slide, and as the great rocker David Bowie once said, social is driving changes. Social media is really the great leveler, and what I love about it is it puts virtually everyone on the same playing field with the same level of power and influence. As we all know, the contact center was built, as I like to say, as a moat to keep customers away from executives. And social media is actually the bridge that the angry villagers have dropped across the moat, and they're starting to storm the castle. So if you look at these statistics, this is the one that I think should strike fear and hope at the same time into the heart of every marketer who may be on the phone. In 2012, Twitter added more than 1 million accounts every day. But the very interesting step that follows that is 56% of customers say their service tweets went unanswered. So what that means is customers are changing the channel, and the contact center isn't there to hear them. So I'm very excited to hear Dr. Natalie address that later on in the webinar. Another trend that is driving real transformation in the contact center is mobile. So if you're like me, and if you have a kid in college like I do, you're never without your mobile device. My smartphone lets me connect with your company virtually any time of the day or night, no longer just during business hours. So consider the impact of mobile on call volumes and staffing. And this device lets me contact you via 5 different channels. And you know what? I expect that you're going to be waiting for me at the other side. All this adds up to, what I call a new customer mantra. I want it all and I want it now. So in the 1970s, it was completely acceptable for a customer to walk into a branch, ask for information, wait a day to get their issues addressed. But as more real-time communication vehicles have come into the mix, especially with the rise of social and mobile, customers demand almost an immediate response from your organization. And you know what? If you're not prepared to deliver it, it's easier than ever before in history for them to take their business someplace else. So is your contact center ready for that future? That's the question we want to ask. So where we are today is that marketers like me are really no longer in charge of the brand. It now rests squarely in the hands of our customers, and I believe is created or destroyed by the customer experience that your contact center delivers. So in an effort to really understand the connection between customer channel preferences, loyalty, and satisfaction, last month, InContact and Harris Interactive conducted a survey of more than 2,000 U.S. customers. What's very interesting and what the survey very clearly shows is that consumers are making less of their buying decisions based on brand loyalty, but rather on which companies can match their desired experience at the time of their choosing. So let's take a quick look at what some of these results are and discuss a bit about what it means for your contact center. So according to the Harris findings, more than 50% of U.S. adults would be at least somewhat likely to switch to another brand or company if offered more options and channels to connect with them than they're currently using. But I think perhaps the most compelling statistic, and I love it when the click and the build works, is that younger consumers aged 18 to 44 are even 20% more likely to leave you than their counterparts aged 55 and older, showing a significant shift among the younger consumer base. So, while that's not rocket science and it's something we should all understand, if this is your demographic, you need to remember that this generation of consumers who are used to lots of information and being presented with a myriad of choices are crying out for a tailored experience with your brand, and they're demanding more options and availability to handle these interactions when and how they see fit. The survey results clearly show that if your contact center neglects to accommodate customer preferences or adopt evolving channels of communication, there will be hell to pay. So the question is, do your customers see your brand as outdated and not with the times? The survey told us that 86%, a whopping 86% of consumers surveyed, expect your contact center to meet them in their channel of choice whenever they need you. And 82% said that this flexibility of interaction and customizing their experience with your company is directly connected to their satisfaction with your brand. In the next slide, we see that nearly half of smartphone owners find themselves using their smartphone more and more for customer service, and not surprisingly, it's being driven by young adults aged 18 to 34. So what's really, I think, the most interesting and scary number here for the contact center is 70% of U.S. adults say that apps for mobile devices are a must, and 67% say that SMS text messaging capabilities are important methods of communication for your companies to have. Are you ready for this mobile future? This is the question that you need to ask yourself. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah now for our next poll. Sarah?
Thank you so much. All right, so let's pull up our next poll, everyone. And you might have already anticipated what question we're going to ask you, but we'd like to know, how does your contact center deliver social media customer service? So we're very interested to hear if you've started monitoring social yet, if marketing presently owns the social media strategy and is routing those interactions solely to you to answer for customer service, if you have a dedicated or a small group of agents handling social, or if social is fully integrated into the service process just as phone, chat, and email are, and that their infrastructure and day-to-day operations essentially operate the same for social as any of your other channels. So if you can go ahead and select that for us, please. And what we'll hear in a couple minutes from Dr. Natalie is essentially what you can do at each stage of your social media customer service journey. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at those poll results. So 51% marketing. Marianne, you're still owning that social media.
It's not a surprise, but it's a little disappointing. I think that in most organizations, and certainly Dr. Natalie is more qualified to talk about this than I am, is where it starts, and from there, it really spreads into the contact center.
Absolutely. All right. Any other words of wisdom, Marianne, before we move forward?
No, I know Dr. Natalie's got a lot of great content that I'm really excited to hear.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Sorry, I'm having a little, there we go. Come on, little challenge getting. My poll results are not moving forward. There we go. All right, so one more time, everyone. Since we are talking about social media, I think it's only appropriate to remind you to please be social again. Handles and hashtags are up on screen right now. We want to hear what you think. And again, please go ahead and participate in our Q&A session. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Natalie.
Thank you so very much. So people often ask me about my background, and in the very beginning of my career is in management consulting, and you'll see how that comes out here in my presentation. I also spent a bit of time at Forrester, and I studied social media and customer service. And one of the things that I realized, I was watching customers, and they were posting in social channels where marketing was doing these amazing campaigns. And the question I had in my mind was, I need to learn, I need to sit in the role of PR and marketing so that I can truly understand that roles, what they do, what they value, what keeps them up at night, because I could see that there was a need to really integrate marketing and customer service. And what's fascinating, I love when we do polls like this because it really does show you who owns the social customer. But the fact is it's really important that those two departments collaborate because, well, my saying is that you can't sell stuff to people who are mad. So we are now seeing this interaction where customer service and marketing really need to collaborate. So today I'm going to talk about 7 steps that build relationships that last, and it's really looking at integrating social and traditional customer experience. When I talk to a lot of executives, what they tell me is, Dr. Nat, don't tell anybody this, but it feels like there's an insurmountable amount of information. And honestly, when I listen to stuff like this, I feel like there's a big blur. And oftentimes people say, I don't even know how to catch up. I feel really behind. And some of the questions that they've come to me and said, I really want to know, how do I take my traditional customer experience or customer service, add social, and take everything to the next level? What they're asking me about is, how do I do more of the right things? How do I put structure around social media that seems completely unstructured? And that can be really frustrating for people in the contact center because contact centers measure every single thing, average handle time, after work call time, when an agent goes to the bathroom. So everything is measured. So now we introduce social, which is unstructured, and it can seem just very, very confusing. One of the things they asked me was, is there some way to benchmark where I am and then maybe use that to create a strategy and a plan? And if I could do that, then I could track my progress. I could gather the right metrics. I could create a business case that my executives would understand, and then I could really create and sustain a world-class customer experience, which is all what we're really after. So today I'm going to talk about a framework to integrate the new stuff with the old stuff. So what I really want to do for you today is to provide a framework to take what I think is a bit of a chaos and turn that into order. And the way that I've done that is I've created a 7-step process. This is something I teach over at UCLA Anderson, and it was my way of figuring out exactly what you need to do. And I've split it into 7 categories, and sometimes I think step 6, which is the organizational politics, should be step 1, and I would love everybody's feedback on that. But let's start with step 1, and we'll walk through each of these, and I'll give you a little bit of insight into what I'm seeing. So the first one is gathering insights by monitoring and listening. So let's take a look at what that means. What I find is whether you're in marketing or you're in customer service, we all seem to suffer from what I call the Rodney Dangerfield effect, which is that we just don't get enough respect. We may not feel empowered with budget or resources to make the changes we know we need to make. And oftentimes we don't have the support of executive management because they see the contact center as a cost center. So it was interesting to me when I first started looking at social, I realized it is truly a game changer. And the difference between before social and after social is something I call the witness factor. What's interesting to me is that there's a book, and it is called The Clue Train Manifesto. And if you have not read it, it was written in 1999, and every time I pick it up, I get double goosebumps. What these four authors predicted was that there would be a place in time where the customer's voice and the employee's voice would start to mean something, and that they would be able to make a difference. And the reason that this would change is that there would be an enabling technology to be able to make and integrate that information in a way that has never been surfaced before. And that really is what social media is today, and we are here now. And what's interesting is if you read this book, it's almost as though it was written in 2012. And what I see this for most of us is, most of us have been in the contact center world for 10, 15, 20 years. And when I started to really see it through this lens, I realized what a great opportunity that we all have to actually change the way things are and do more of the right things. I grew up in Detroit, and one of my heroes was Edward Deming, and he was the father of quality. And he was one of the scholars, and there are many others, Tom Peters, have really said, let's look at and listen to customers, employees, partners, and take all that feedback and integrate it back into your company. And if you did that, you would have amazing products and services. And so now we're kind of at that crux where what's interesting to me is that that's always been true and it's always been a good idea. What social media is doing is forcing companies, because it's the posts are in public, they're permanent. I've worked with a couple of executives that said, I showed them some screenshots, and they said, well, Dr. Knapp, let's just take that down. And I said, well, one, if it's not on your own website, you can't get access to take it down. And two, it's really not in good form, because people will notice and then they'll realize that you're trying to hide something. And so we're really in that age of what I would call authentic, genuine communication. So it's not really an option to take it down. And what's interesting is, if you're open to it, is that almost every single thing that a business needs to know, what's working, what's not working, what would be better if, can be seen in social networks. And so this is really the opportunity to see customer service as the canary in the coal mine. And I think what's different now is that, and there's a lot of debates about who should own the social customer, and I really think that it's less about ownership and it's more about collaboration between any customer-facing departments in a company. And because customer service, one, generally has the technology to do the two-way interaction, and because they're used to providing the answers, and customer service is the place where customers talk about their experience with the product. So marketing does an amazing job of creating promises and communicating the value and the benefits and features and all those kind of things. Customer service is the place, and I don't even know if we should have these dividing lines in these department titles anymore, but as it stands now, as we've got our silos defined, customer service is the place where customers interact with the product and go to report back their experience. So what I'm seeing now is that both marketing and customer service are using technology to be able to do that two-way interaction. So let's look at some best practices. One of the things that you want to do is you want to start to do some real-time monitoring to manage your business. And there are many free tools that you can use. Something very, very simple is search.twitter.com. You could use Board Tracker for forums and blogs. So you want to minimally, or something like Social Mention, those are free tools. Super best practices are to be able to create a digital dashboard. You can see one here that's a picture of Adele, and that gives you a real-time monitoring, listening, and interaction and engagement console. So you can constantly see what's happening when there's trouble brewing. Let's say you're launching a marketing campaign and then people are doing pound fail. One, that tells you that there's something that needs to be cleaned up, and two, you can avert the risk by being there and participating. And what I think the most important thing, and this is the biggest tip I have for the whole day, is basically to monitor and take some screenshots and put them in a PowerPoint, and then I would say take a couple of people that are important stakeholders to lunch and say, I see these things happening in our company. I wanted to get your point of view on that. And see if you can start to create a dialogue and be the person who crosses the chasm to other departments. So let's look a little bit about, if you did monitor, how would that change agent handle times? And part of what I've been trying to do in my practice is to be able to take social and relate it to things that contact center people know and are familiar with. So let's say we look at our knowledge bases. Most knowledge bases are full of answers or solutions with known problems. But business is changing really quickly, and issues are surfacing more quickly than ever before. So social really provides a quick way to know what's happening, what's changed, and a quick way to pivot or to avert the risk. So let's say that you had, we're going to do a little ROI here. So let's say your support interaction was 30,000 interactions a month. The first call is $7, and the cost of the second call would be, so we're looking at first contact resolution. We're starting to look at here, what if you could increase that first contact resolution? What would that benefit be to you to be able to have the right information so that people weren't calling back? And what you can see here is you could save about $12,000 a month. So now let's look at step 2, and that's really about creating a measurement program. So here, oftentimes we drive the wrong behaviors. If we focus on average handle time, agents will get off the phone before they actually help a customer because they'll get dinged. And most companies haven't set up a measurement program to give attribution to social media, and they're confused about how do you calculate social media ROI. So I started to focus on this, and we were looking at the misconceptions about social media ROI. And there's a meme going around, would you calculate the ROI of your mom or your pants? And I think people who say things like this, I think that social media and its value is so obvious to them that they feel like they don't need a calculation. And while I think the infographic is cute and funny, when you go to pitch your boss, they really need a number on why should they invest in this. So we've done a whole bunch of studies around this, and what we're finding is that not only are there benefits to customer service, but there's benefits to every single department in the company. So when you're using the voice of the customer, the voice of the employee to create better experiences and products, because you're creating things that people actually want, that's going to reduce the cost of PR marketing, which increases the lead conversion rate, which decreases the cost of sales. And then with respect to returns and churn, that's also going to go down. And if you build the products that people want and you're communicating it really well, now you're going to start to reduce the cost of customer service, of consumer affairs, and the calls or interactions you're taking are people who really need help versus the kind of generic calls or information that people want. And where it really hits the bottom line is looking at customer lifetime value, which basically means that you want customers to buy more for a longer period of time. And think about yourself as you think about the products and services that you purchase. Do you go back to the same companies? What is your experience with them? And oftentimes what you'll find is if you notice your own behavior, that behavior is also simulated by your customers. The other thing we notice is that when we ask agents or employees about how they think or feel or ask for their input, what we see is a reduction in attrition and an increase in productivity because they actually feel like they're making a difference. So in my practice, when we look at social customer service and ROI, these are a list of some of the metrics in customer service that we've been actually able to measure, and we've built ROI models around this, as well as PR marketing and product development. Let's take a look at step 3. This is about knowing your audience. This is a really important thing, and what we're finding is that we don't always know our customers like we should, and in particular, to be able to give attribution to social, and how is that really helping marketing or PR or customer service, we need to have our customers' social identities to match that with a phone record or email record so we can track things like churn or increase in customer lifetime value. And most systems, most companies don't have that yet. And we also want to look at enrolling brand ambassadors because when you can do that, you get a large call deflection. And brand ambassadors also help with better customer experiences, and that 1 to hundreds or millions, that's really where you get the lift that increases loyalty, advocacy, and referrals, which is very important. Now, with respect to millennials, if you're looking at the screen and you're wondering, what on earth does that say? Well, it's really important to take a look at how millennials are communicating, and their way of being is much different. And I was at my sister's house for Thanksgiving, and my nephew, who's 14, was upstairs, and dinner was ready, so he sent me a text. The dinner's ready. So I go upstairs and go, hey, Nick. He's like, yeah. I said, how come you sent me a text for dinner when it was ready? And he goes, what do you mean, Aunt Nettie? I said, well, how come you just didn't yell down the stairs? And he looks at me very perplexed, and he says, hey, Nettie, if I could send you a text, why would I yell down the stairs? And that's when I viscerally got the difference between my generation and younger generations. This is a study that we looked at the different channel requirements for different age brackets. So, and this is interesting that it also matched the survey that we did today. Everybody's still using the phone, but when you start to look at text, you can see there's a big difference between different generations. So the question is, can you actually deliver on the right channel to the right audience? So now in this next slide, what we look at is the range of devices. So not only do you need to consider a channel, but you want to consider who is your customer base today, and what channels do they prefer, and what devices do they prefer, and can you actually deliver a great customer experience on all of these devices? Not that we needed any more complexity in the contact center, but we're definitely there. Now let's look at knowing your audiences. You want to make sure that you have social identities. You want to be able to have that in your customer record, and you want to start to study their preferences for channels and devices and use that when you're interacting with them, and that will make that interaction far more relevant to them. Best practices for step 3 is really making sure that your interactions are so meaningful that you create a galvanizing bond and you build an ambassador network that answers the questions and can also step up and defend the brand when you have an online crisis. There's nothing more important than having the voice of the customer or customers like customers versus the brand trying to fix something. So now let's look at step 4. And step 4 is about content. And generally content is thought of a marketing discipline, but what I'm looking at content here is really the information that's in the knowledge base. So the question is your content really relevant? Does it help customers get what they need? Does it answer the questions that they have? And is the format and distribution effective? So let's take a look at why people go, let's say, to an online branded community. Well, people feel like they can get information more quickly, they can get answers from people like themselves, so it's in context of the user's experience, and they get more accurate information, which I think is an interesting point because a lot of customers or a lot of companies worry that if customers are helping other customers, is the information correct? And if you have some sort of mechanism and you have 10,000 people in a community and 90% of them click yes, that was good answers for it to the top, and you can rest assured that that's the best information, and then you can start to scrape that information out of your community and use that in your knowledge base. So let's look at if you had self-service that actually delivered and you were able to reduce your interactions by maybe 20%, what the calculation here shows you is that you could save almost $60,000 a year. So let's take a look at step 5, which is designing great customer interactions. And most people, what's interesting in my step model is most people jump to step 5, which is, I think, a knee-jerk reaction, which I think stems back to when IT was the hub, was really before SaaS implementation. And so the first thing that people think of is, let's buy the technology. But they forget all these other steps before that. And so then, they put up a Twitter, they put up a Facebook, and they say, Happy Monday, and buy our stuff, and then wonder where the return on investment is. So step 5 is really about looking at that customer interaction and the technology platforms and systems that are used to interact with the customers, and you want to ask yourself, can it deliver content, capture feedback, and enhance the interaction, or is it really falling short? Many companies that I've worked with have homegrown customer contact center records and CRM databases with no ability to interact in social, mobile, or interactive channels. And many times companies don't even realize it, but they designed the channel interaction from the company's point of view and not necessarily doing a day in the life of or customer experience mapping to truly understand what is the experience of a company. But I can tell you that if I could see you all out there, and I would ask you to raise your hands, how many of you have had a bad experience with customer service? Most people would have their hands up. So the question is, why does that happen? And I think part of it is because we haven't really understood our customer's journey. We don't really know what channels they're on, and we don't really follow the day in the life of. So, for instance, maybe somebody is researching something on a particular channel, then they go to buy it, then they have questions, and then if they have a good customer experience, that's when they're going to post in the social channels. So the questions we really want to ask ourselves are, will the technology that we're currently using enable all of these things? So let's look at the traditional customer service channels. Let's look at chat. Let's look at desktop screen sharing, especially if you're looking at those to really help shopping cart abandonment. And then looking at mobile. I mean, I think that the idea that we are carrying around our mobile devices all the time, and even, you see this in the marketing and sales side of it, people are going to big box retailers to touch and feel the technology and standing in the room of the showroom and buying it online from another company. That's called showrooming. And then you want to look at social channels and how have you integrated those into the contact center. And what's really important is that if you're going to do social, you want to make sure that you have this integrated, because the worst thing that you could do is have a customer interacting in social, then they're interacting in the traditional channels, and if the agent can't see that the customer has been interacting in these other channels, they may give them, a different agent may give them a slightly different answer, or you can't see the previous history, so it can be very frustrating from the customer's point of view. This is a roadmap that Buddy Media and Luna Partners did of the range of options in social media, so it makes a lot of sense to me why people are confused, and part of what we do is we help people choose the right technology to get done what they need to do. Step 6 is really organizational politics and gaining alignment. And I was on a tweet chat yesterday where I said something about I thought organizational politics should be a white-collar crime, and a whole bunch of people retweeted that. So I think there's a lot of people with a similar kind of sentiment. And what I see in organizations today is that the politics are thicker than ever. Everybody wants to own the social customer. And part of the problem is no established personnel model, committee, group, task force to create a social media policy, to know who's going to do what by when. There's very little training for any of the departments. And so oftentimes you have single individuals taking it upon themselves, and they're the force behind the customer interaction. But that can result in a very disjointed experience. So the question becomes, who should answer the social customer? Who should coordinate that, engage them, and if there's a problem, in triage. And the old model was marketing, sales, and customer service, and it was very linear. And today what I call this is the marketing pretzel, which is the point here is that at any point in time in the life cycle of a customer may be reaching out to marketing, to PR, depending on who owns the social channel. And as we saw from our previous slide, basically we see that marketing owns a lot of it. So now marketing is going to be getting those questions, and the question is, do they know exactly what to do with the answers? So some best practices is to conduct a social media readiness assessment and look at the risks of not creating some sort of policy or organization. And when I say policy, I don't mean restrictive. I don't mean that, people can't have the freedom to do the things they need to do, but just put some structure around it so that, if I've seen a lot of companies where maybe PR owns a Facebook page, but behind the scenes, you need to be able to triage those comments that need to go to customer service, and you see a collaboration between marketing and customer service. So you want to begin to have executives champion your strategies and your plans and your resources and drive that cross-functional collaboration. And the readiness assessment and the workshops that I've helped customers with help facilitate that, because now we're getting everybody in the same room, and instead of someone inside the company trying to solve this, you have an outside person who can help to mitigate some of those things. And when I was inside of companies, I remember I would have an idea and I would say, we need more chairs. I'm just using chairs as a metaphor. And everybody, Dr. Now, we don't need chairs. That's not a good idea. And the consultant would come in and they would say, I see, you're all standing. We need more chairs. And everybody would say, did you hear what the consultant said? We need more chairs. And let's order 50,000 of them right away. I'd be sitting there thinking, I just said that. But the truth is, when you're inside an organization, it's very, very, very difficult to drive change. And so, part of what you want to do is find your executive stakeholders that are high enough in the organization that can get behind this and understand it. And part of it is having some structure around how you want to approach it and helping them understand why this is so important. The other piece here is making sure that you have community managers who are assigned to interact with target audiences on all these presences, and to be able to react and respond in ways that actually enhance engagement. And then step 7 is really a page out of the startup plan, which is iterate and pivot. And so the problem is you have a scorecard. So if you were to take a look at these 7 or 6 steps, do you know where you rank with respect to a maturity capability? And if you do have some sort of scorecard, that's great. So the next piece is now to make sure that you're iterating your policies and procedures and you're constantly monitoring and looking at your benchmarks around people, process, and technology so that you can pivot very quickly to make these continuous measurable improvements. And that will help you reach your business goals. It'll help you stay in compliance for the people in the legal part of the company, and at the same time provide a great customer experience. So what we've seen customers do that work with us is to do some sort of benchmark where they go through the 7 steps, they get a score, and when they're able to benchmark like that, that really provides them with great context on what they need to do next. And that's my 7 steps. So I'll turn it over back to Sarah.
Terrific. And thank you, Dr. Natalie and Marion. So before we jump into questions, Marion, I'd like to turn it back over to you and have you just mention the very interesting assessment from InContact.
Talking to my mute button, don't you love when you do that? I would be remiss if I did not mention this. So, one of the things, and hopefully it's clear from this Harris Interactive study that we did, we're sort of on this journey too where we want to be a trusted advisor. We want to help the organizations that we work with understand where they are on the kind of journeys that Dr. Natalie just talked about and how we can help to move them forward. So just yesterday we launched a brand new contact center assessment program where we are putting together a wide variety of contact center benchmarks and metrics that we've worked with the Aberdeen group to develop, and you can basically go up online and take the benchmark assessment. It takes less than 5 minutes. It's role-based. So there's one for contact center managers and executives and another for folks on the more IT technical side. And then it'll give you a very good sense of where you are sort of on that journey of from laggard to innovator. And then some very concrete follow-ups and steps and some interesting data and reports from Aberdeen to help you really kind of understand what the next steps are. So thanks for asking about that, Sarah. I had a question that was sort of burning while Dr. Natalie was speaking. Dr. Natalie, do you find that especially with the contact centers you're engaging with today, is their engagement with you and their sort of movement towards social reactionary based on something that happened in their business, whether there was some sort of a big hullabaloo in social around the brand or a particular issue, or is it more of an evolutionary approach?
You know, it's interesting because if you haven't studied it, I would take a look at Jocelyn Moore's social business or the technology adoption curve, and many of my writings I look at is, so there's the first two groups, the innovators and early adopters, and what he was talking about is how to tech companies move through their cycle of marketing and sales to different people inside an organization. And I've modified Jocelyn's model a little bit to take a look at companies who have jumped on the social customer bandwagon. They have individuals within the company that are largely made up of innovators and early adopters. And those two parts of the curve are pretty small if you look at the overall population. And the next section of that curve is called the early majority. And it's probably about 40%, maybe 30% of the overall population. And they're very pragmatic. They want to know how this is going to affect my business. And so it really depends on the culture makeup of the company. What often happens is for the companies that have a culture of very pragmatic early majority is they wait too long, and then they end up with a crisis. And then they're coming to people like you or I to say, oh, oops, help us fix this. And so what I'm trying to do with the structure, and I love you guys are doing benchmarking, is to help people get context around the idea that if you do this, you're going to not only prevent a disaster, but you're also going to create better customer experiences. And think about a company that does this and think about a company that doesn't. I really think customers are going to vote with their feet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's pretty much what we see. We've got folks that are what I call the dabblers, or those people that, social's on their list of things to do, but they're not 100% sure how they're going to get there yet. And then the ones that it sort of seems to rise to the top of the list are those that, are reacting to something very specific where, their organization got caught in their back foot. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then, Sarah, I promise I'll hand it back to you as the moderator.
No worries.
But another thing that you said that I absolutely love, because it's what we truly believe in and preach to our customers and in contact, is that social needs to be integrated into the fabric and into the overall workflow of the contact center. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? Because what we see is that many organizations start with social as what I call a little cottage industry. So, a few agents off to the side aren't integrated into the overall workflow, don't have the same visibility to the intelligence and the connectivity to CRM and transactions. So can you just talk a little bit about your view on that as well?
Yeah, what's interesting is that, a lot of this stuff to me feels like common sense. So I get a little bit frustrated when I see companies not doing things that make sense. But then I have to realize that just because it makes sense to me, it doesn't necessarily make sense to other people. And so, I think you're absolutely right. Do you have statistics around that?
I don't, but our partner SocoCare probably does. But it's one of the things that I'd really like to benchmark next, to really take a look at the difference in productivity and the difference in customer satisfaction around it, because I think it's absolutely key.
Yeah, what we see, because I've spent a lot of time in larger contact centers, small contact centers, and there is a huge difference in agent productivity when they have the right tools. And the easier you make it for an agent to do their job, meaning if they don't have dozens of windows open, the system isn't slow, they can actually find the information that they need in the knowledge base. I was just at a very large satellite TV company and in their call center, and the knowledge base didn't work, so agents created their own separate, each individual separate Excel spreadsheet, and that's where they had their most commonly asked questions and answers. So, I knew that was happening, 20 years ago, but with the technology that's here now, it feels kind of kooky to me that we're still not giving customer service agents the things that they need. And in those kind of contact centers, you see very, very, very like 49% turnover rate. And here's the problem with that is turnover is extremely expensive. And so, my thought is, would you spend your money on attrition, or should you spend your money on doing more of the right thing?
Absolutely, and we need to get together. I need to talk to you a little bit about InContact and our universal queue and our sort of centralized approach to all of that, because we see exactly the same thing. And I swear, really, I am going to turn it over to you right now, Sarah. One final comment that I have is, for such a long time we've vilified the agents, and I think what you just said about the turnover is so true. Agents want to do a great job. They want the power, they want the information to be able to serve the customer well, to have a satisfying experience for them and the company and the customer. And I think, it's high time that we really started to deliver that. Okay, Sarah, back to you, I promise.
No problem. I love the conversation, and absolutely. I think you both touched on some really key points here, particularly around the benchmarking, which I honestly think is a perfect segue. Benchmarking does give contact centers context around channels and needs of their customers. So excellent way to kick off the Q&A. So let's get to some audience questions. And I want to remind everyone again that you can continue to ask questions during this Q&A portion. And if we don't get to your question today, don't worry. We'll make sure to answer it offline. But so, Marion, since you were asking a few, it's only fair that I'm going to direct the first one to you. And this is, it was the title of our webinar today. And there's a lot of conversation right now about the balance of power shifting from the organization over to the customer. Now, in your opinion, is this a temporary phenomenon, or will there be a rebalance of power in the near future?
I don't think it's temporary. I think, we have opened the barn door and the horses are out and they are not going back in. I think customers have experienced what it really means to be in control of the purchase, in control of the experience. And I think it's really just going to go from there. And it's going to require more and more customization and personalization on the part of, of companies like us and contact centers and really the whole approach. So I don't see there being a rebalance in the near future, especially when you consider the sort of absolute viral mania around reviews and the fact that people are just really looking for information from peers. They don't want to be marketed to anymore. Once you start to taste the power of that, I planned an entire vacation to Ireland last year based on TripAdvisor, which is one of my go-to apps. And I won't go back to anything else because it was so positive for me. I spent a lot of time looking at reviews of the places that I wanted to go, selected, bed and breakfast based on reviews of people like me who are on vacation with a family, the age of mine, and it was a wonderful experience. So why would I want to go back to sort of the traditional, you send me information and then I'll review it? It just doesn't make sense because I've tasted the power of having the information I want in my hands.
And the power can be used for good and not evil. All right. So, and that's a big concern, though, of organizations out there right now is, opening up those floodgates and that fear that once they've opened it, they can't close it back down. So, Natalie, in your experience, working with so many different companies, what advice, do you give them right now in how to overcome some of those big challenges that they should anticipate when implementing something like social customer service?
So I think part of it is, like Marion has said, is that you need to benchmark so you know where you're at so that you're actually doing things that make sense. Oftentimes, I think what is frustrating to me, and Marion, maybe you can comment on this too, is that people just jump in and they start doing stuff without knowing what they should be fixing. So, it would be like if you went to the doctor and your arm was broken and you said, well, I think I need an EKG for my heart. A good test is not relevant to your broken arm. So I think part of it is, part of the most important thing is to go out there and monitor, use some of the free tools, put in your brand name, do some Google alerts, and just kind of see what people are saying about your brand. And for some brands, nobody's talking about you, which is a problem. For other brands, people are talking about you, but they're saying horrible things. And the first time I saw that, I literally had to sit on my hands because it felt so personal, and I felt wronged that I wanted to reach out and say, hey, wait a minute, ouch, that hurt. So I encourage you, if you have the courage to go out there and look, to know that there are going to be people saying bad things, and it shouldn't really come as a surprise, because if you listen to the calls in the contact center, a good percentage of them are people complaining. I think what's really kind of a rude awakening or sobering moment is when you realize the comments are public. And so part of that is that your own internal sense of what is being said about your company. And once you see it, then you can start to simulate, okay, this is really important. It's here to stay. It's not going away. These social channels, the Web 2.0 technologies have built, Google, Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, and there'll be a whole bunch of more other platforms like community platforms. They're not going away. So the question is, do you know what's being said, and how can you actually become part of the conversation so that you can either increase that customer experience or mitigate risk?
Well, there are so many things that Natalie said that I want to react to that I'm not even sure where to start, because that minute and a half was so rich with interesting things. Probably one of the first things that I want to say is, companies don't have control of the floodgates, and I think that's some kind of a misperception. And Natalie's 100% right. You can choose not to listen, but it doesn't mean that there isn't dialogue happening that you're unaware of. So, job number one is absolutely tune in. And I'm amazed at the number of companies who sort of forge out there with a strategy without listening first, and listening for some time and really understanding what's being said and what the sentiment is. The other thing that she said that really struck the sort of red alarm was listening to calls in the contact center. I am often struck by being with peers, other CMOs, who have never even considered the benefit or even the possibility of listening to calls in the contact center on, whether it's on particular campaigns or topics, products, whatever it might be, that it's not something that's part of marketing's engagement with the business and specifically with the contact center. So there should be no surprises, Dr. Natalie says, if we're plugged in. And I think it's just another one of those places that shows that we, more than ever before, there used to be about 10 years ago, and I'm sure, Dr. Natalie, you remember this, the should marketing own the contact center, right? Now it's should marketing or should the contact center own social. But I think what's interesting is that all the things that are happening, social, mobile, self-service, so many of these really big mega trends that are driving our business dictate more than ever before that marketing and the contact center be joined at the hip. They really are two sides of the same coin. And when it comes to social, we need to really understand and figure out how do we engage in a way that we keep the love alive between the organizations, that we move with synchronicity, because it's about brand, it's about service, it's about experience, and all those three things have come together in such a meaningful way in the past 18 months. And it will never be the same again. So, we need to figure it out for once and for all.
Well, I think that is a perfect place for us to end today. It is about brand, it's about service, it's about experience, and it's never going to be the same again. So I am afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. And Marion, Dr. Natalie, I want to thank you again for such an engaging conversation. If we didn't get to your questions, please don't worry. As I mentioned before, we will be posting an article on ICMI.com, and we'll answer all the questions that are presently in the queue. If you have additional questions, by all means, please feel free to reach out to me at ssteely@icmi.com with those questions, and I will be sure to direct them to Dr. Natalie and to Marion. You can also follow us on Twitter, and we can keep the conversations going there as well. Shortly following today's live webinar, you will also be able to access and share this presentation on demand from the console in PDF format. And I do need to mention that this webinar is copyright 2013 by ICMI. The presentation materials are owned by or copyright, if that is the case, by ICMI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of ICMI and our speakers, and of course our sponsor InContact, we thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.